For the second part of this exercise, we're going to be animating the biting down portion of his head movement. By now, we should have, or you should have, finished out the opening of the jaw, making it nice and wide. I'm going to turn off my rough animation. And so we're going to pick up on these last couple of frames for this first part of the head's movement, showing the biting down portion and working in with it. To get started, we're in the regular scene 1. Let's go ahead and go to that frame number 21 that has the head moving slightly just up. And let's add another keyframe right on the head layer at frame 21. So with it selected, I'll hit F6. And then we can double click, or excuse me, not double click, just click on the head and let's move it into place for there. Then finally, let's move to that second keyframe that has the head going down and making the chomp. And so that would be on frame number 26. We're going to select the 26th frame of the head layer, insert another keyframe there, and with that we're going to move the head down into position down here. Now when we do this, you'll notice that the head itself is going to have a little bit of squashing and stretching distortion. So I'm going to line it up where the little tufts of hair are. Later on, when we fix this part of the head shape, we'll stretch it out to fit everything else from there. Now that we have our two different head movements, we can go into the head object itself and try to make the right adjustments. So I'm going to go back to this 21st frame and select the keyframe here. Now let's double click on the head object and go into the head itself. We're still on the 21st frame in our timeline, and just like we did with all of the others, we need to click and drag and select all of the frames that are on the 21st frame for every row. With all of those selected, you can hit F6 and turn in a keyframe there. Finally, let's go back to scene 1 and remember this second keyframe. This is on frame number 26 here. And so with it selected on our main timeline, let's double click on the head object. And with the 26th frame selected in this timeline, let's select all of those and hit F6 to insert a keyframe here. So just like we did with the last one, we want it to animate the head from a starting position up at the top. In this case, it would be this open mouth position all the way down to the closed chomping position on frame 26. I'm going to zoom in my object so I can see all the different parts. And just like the first part of this animation, all the parts on the 21st frame are already set up. What we need to do is make adjustments on this 26th frame for each of the different layers. So I'm going to go over to my layers on my timeline and let's turn off visibility for everything by clicking and dragging on all of those. And take this one object at a time. First, we'll start with the nose layer. I'm going to turn on my nose and we'll zoom out. You can see that this nose needs to be brought down and widened out just a bit. So with the nose selected, make sure we're clicking on it. By the way, I've got everything locked down, so let me unlock all of these too. That looks good. Now I can select my nose. I've got that 26th frame selected. I'll grab my transform tool, hit Q, let's move it up and into place where it needs to be. So we'll drag it out, and if need be, I can hold down Option and get it to be into place. Now that it's distorted, I can go up to my timeline, and for this nose, since this is just a basic shape, we're going to control click or right click and do a classic tween to change that position. So from here, it should be moving from a normal nose to a stretched out nose. That looks pretty good. Now let's do each of the eyes. These are going to be unique because the eyes go from being opened to being closed. But as we've done with the others, let's take it one thing at a time. Looking at the right eyebrow, we'll turn this one on, and you can see how the eyebrow moves from this top position down into here. So with this eyebrow selected, we're going to just move it down and into place right there. And then I can go to my timeline and select this 21st frame, right click or control click on it, and we're going to do a shape tween for it. And that should move that eyebrow nice and into place. That looks correct. And let's do the same for the left eyebrow. Turn on this left eyebrow. Make sure you've got the 26th frame selected. And with that one, we can move it down and into place. And I'm even going to rotate it in just a little bit so it looks good there. Once it's into place, let's go back to our 21st frame, control click, and do a shape tween for it so that everything moves nice and into place for our eyebrows. Now for the right and left pupil, let's turn on the right pupil first. Here's what's happening. The pupil is going to be moving into position and then disappearing just as the eye closes. So what we want to do is not have it go all the way to the 26th frame. On this frame, the pupil is going to disappear altogether. So I'm going to select one frame just before that one. And let's insert another keyframe. With the new keyframe there, let's move the pupil into position. So this will move up until right about there. And then I'm going to use my free transform tool, and I'm going to squash it down, holding down Option to get just a little bit smaller, back to a rounded position. As we've done with the other one, we'll go up here, do a shift click, do a shape tween. So now it's going from a stretch out position to here. I know that looks really strange, but trust me, it'll work out. And when it gets to this 26th frame, we want it to disappear altogether. So I hit the delete key and deleted it away. Let's do the same for the left pupil. So I'm turning visibility on. We're going to our timeline and insert another keyframe just before the 26th frame. So right there on 25. We'll go down to our timeline and let's move it into position. And I'm going to choose my transform tool and bring it back down to more of a circular kind of position. And with that done, we can select this 26th frame and delete away that one. Finally, we can return up here and let's do the shape tween for that. So now they're going to move into position, and when the eyes close, they're completely gone by that frame. That looks good for that. Now let's do the right and left eye. So with the right eye, we'll turn on visibility for it. And you can see it needs to go from a stretched out position and all the way down to a closed position. So with this, just like we did with the pupil, we want to change up the look of the eye by here. So I'm going to choose the 25th frame and hit F6. So right there. By this one, we want the eye to be moved up into this position. I'm going to grab my free transform tool or hit Q, hold down Option, and we're going to bring it all the way down to right about there. So right there looks good. Going back up to here, let's do a shape tween. And then finally, when it reaches this frame, so I've selected frame number 26, we want to get rid of the eyeball altogether by deleting it. And then I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool. And remember, with the paintbrush tool, we can set our fill color to be black. And I'm going to set my stroke. I've already got my size to be 5 point. And let's draw in the closed eyelid. So now what's happening, we'll go back. The eye is getting smaller, going into position, and then it reaches that 26th frame, it closes off altogether. Let's do the same for the left eye. Turn on visibility for the left eye. Go to our timeline. Let's insert a keyframe right at frame 25. And then let's go into our frame. We'll move it over. Grab our free transform tool and then bring it down. I'm holding down the Option key. Let's bring that up just a little bit too. So that looks good for there. And then we'll go to our timeline. Choose this frame and do a shape tween between it. Then we can choose our 26th frame. With that done, I'm going to delete away my open eye, grab my brush tool, and let's paint on the closed eye. So now both the eyes squash down and close as they're animating through. So far, so good. Now we can go in and do the left and right cheek lines. And remember, these come in handy to show where your mouth is, the edges of the mouth. So with the cheek line turned on, again, we'll go back to that 26th frame. And it's difficult to see, but there it is right there. So I'll swap over to my selection tool, and I'm going to use my arrow keys to nudge that into place right there. Let's do the same thing. Whoops, before we move on, let's go up here, and again, we'll turn on our shape tween for that. And then finally, we'll go over to our right cheek, turn that one on. Do make sure you've got the 26th frame selected. And with that, we can move this one by selecting it and nudge it into place too. Before we move on, let's choose to create a shape tween for those. Now before we tackle the mouth, jaw, and head, I'm going to skip down to the left and right ear. So let's turn on this left ear. Again, go to the 26th frame, and you can see how the ear needs to be bent over and stretched to this side. So I'm going to move it over to here, choose my transform tool, and rotate it just a bit till it's into place. Then when we return to our timeline, since this is saved as a symbol, we're not going to do a shape tween, do the classic tween. And this should move it into place for that one. And let's do the same for the right ear. Turn on visibility for the right ear, choose that 26th frame, and with it selected, we can move it into place, and let's rotate it up. And I'm going to nudge it just past the jawline point. Maybe for this one, we'll also move it over too. There we go. All right, as we've done with the other, return to our timeline, and let's do a classic tween in between both of those as well. So now the ears are moving into place, and we can focus on doing the head, jaw, and mouth. When we go to our timeline and turn on the head layer, you can see that the head needs to be squashed and stretched out just a bit so that everything fits into place. So with that head selected, I've got my transform tool. I'm going to hold down Option and click from the bottom and drag it up just a bit. And we'll let go of Option and stretch it out a little bit wider. Maybe bring it up just a bit more with those. So now, I've made one mistake. I'm going to undo everything that I just did. Before I do that, do make sure you've got that 26th frame selected because we want it to go into place on the appropriate spot. Now with the 26th frame selected, let's bring it back up, holding down Option and then letting go to drag it out from here. That looks much, much better. As we've done with the other one, now for this one, it didn't have a shape tween for the head because it didn't stretch, but for this one, we need to add that classic tween for the head structure. So now when it moves, the ears also move into place and come up for there. Now for the jaw, just like we did in the first half of this exercise where we animated each individual frame of the jaw, we'll have to do the same for all of these frames as well. So I'm going to turn on visibility for my jaw, and you can see how it needs to move from an open position here to a closed position with all the cheeks spread out for here. So with this 26 frames selected, I'm going to delete it away. We'll go to our toolbox, choose your brush tool. Do make sure your fill color is set to black. And then with that 26th frame selected on the jaw layer, let's zoom in, and I want to draw off the outline of just the jaw. So I'm going to start up here. You can see how it's going to overlap the ear just a bit and trace carefully along that edge. Now, if you don't like what you've got, you can always delete it away and start over again. Take it nice and slow. In my case, I'm doing this just with my trackpad on my computer. And then we'll go straight across the nose for here. All that's going to be covered up anyway. Once I've got my jaw outlined, I can go to my toolbox, grab my paint bucket tool, change my fill color by opening it up and clicking on the skin tone on here, and one click should be able to fill that in. So now I've got the entire jaw set for there. Don't worry about the overlap here. We're going to cover that up with the rectangle, the little patch from once we get to the patch part. Now for all of the frames that are in between the closed mouth and the open mouth, just as we did with the chomping one, we need to animate those one frame at a time. But here's how we're going to make it a little bit simpler. We're going to use the frames that were already drawn for opening the mouth and repurpose those for closing the mouth. But we're going to do it in the opposite order. So to do this, let's go to the frames that have the mouth opening. And you can see this frame and this frame are actually the same thing. So I want to choose the very next frame that's just before it's open. So this would be frame number 14. With frame 14 selected, you can control or option or right click on it. And let's copy that frame. Then we can jump to the next frame in front of this part. This would be frame number 22. And let's insert, don't insert a new keyframe, just control click on it. And let's paste and overwrite the frames. And this will swap out what's here. Now when we paste it, we need to make sure our jaw starts to match up with our head. You can see it's off by a little bit. So the first thing I need to do with it selected is to move it up into position. And also let's pay attention to the edges of our mouth, because we want the edges of our mouth to also match up and to still be completely covered up. So with those put up there, I'm going to grab my transform tool. I'm going to drag my sides to be just a little bit wider so that the edges line up with this part here. Let's do the same for this side. Drag it over a little bit wider so that the edges line up with those. And that looks pretty good for that. With that one done, let's return back to our timeline. We'll select this next one in line. So this will be frame number 13. Control click or right click on it. We're going to copy that frame. Let's jump back to the next frame of the mouth closing. So this will be frame number 23. And with the 23rd area, we're going to paste and overwrite that frame. As we did with the other one, let's move it up and also over so that we can see the edges of the mouth. Again, drag it this way and then drag it this way until those corners start to line up and we can still see them, and it works well with our design. With that one done, let's get that final one, the mouth almost always closed. So we'll control click on that one and we'll copy that frame. And in this case, it's not going to go all the way to the edge, but I'm going to choose the next frame here and we'll paste and overwrite it to here. With that done, we can bring this up. And let's drag it out a little bit more. In this case, I'll drag out this side too. And then finally, we'll return to our frame. Let's add one more to this last one. Now we don't have anything to copy right here because we've run out of frames to copy, but we can still take our existing frame, move it up just into position, because this is just before the final chomp. And I'm going to drag this out a little bit wider on either side so that I can see the cheekbones for this right here. Now this won't be 100% perfect because we're going to have to go in and clean this up just a bit more, but right now that actually looks pretty good and will work for what we've got. Now let's clean up this edge part that's here. If we were to play this back, you can see how it's moving into position and working well with that. Now for the patch layer, this one's going to be a little bit more complex, but just like we did with the others, let's turn on the patch visibility. And remember, this patch, all it is just a bar that covers up the top and the bottom portion of it. If you've got the 21st frame selected, that one actually works out okay. But let's choose the 22nd frame and we'll insert a keyframe here. So I'll hit F6. And in this case, I'm going to move the bar up and making sure that it covers up any unnecessary parts here. So we'll move that over and hold down my Option key and I'll move that till it gets in this place. If you need to, you may have to zoom in so that this will be a little bit easier to transform. That's working well for me. So that's okay. Actually, it's still off by just a little bit. There we go. Then we can return to our timeline. Let's go to the 23rd frame, hit F6, and do another one. From here, we're going to move the bar up and into position and cover up most of that. Now, eventually it's going to reach a point where it's hard to cover up these little extra bits. So in that case, we're going to grab our paintbrush tool and we're going to load up our skin tone for our color. And this is where we can go in and just cover up and patch up any unnecessary parts. Let's do the same for this side too. Just paint in and cover up that part of the line. Now we can go to the next frame. Let's insert another keyframe. This will be F6 there. With that done, again, we can go in, we can either erase away or we can redo the bar. In this case, I'm going to select little parts that I painted, carefully clicking on them and delete it away. Let's go over to this side. Select that little painted part. There it is there. Delete it away. Let's use the bar and transform it as much as possible to cover it up. That looks good. And then finally, let's choose our paintbrush tool and let's make this line look a little bit more natural. Excuse me, let's choose the brush tool. So to make it look more natural, I'm going to paint away this part of his cheek. And let's do this part of the cheek as well. And then I'm going to swap over my fill color and I'm going to connect this line in with this line. And do the same thing for this side too. This line's going to come around to there. And then finally, let's return up here to the next line. Hit F6. And we can delete away everything that's there. And I think in this case, let's just choose our fill color. Set my fill color for my brush tool to be the skin tone. And we can go in and paint away the bar. Since I erased away all parts of the bar that was there, I'm just going to make it simple. Now keep in mind, I'm not erasing anything. All I'm doing is using that paintbrush tool to paint in the skin tone. And again, that looks good. Kind of fix it up. Come back over here, maybe get that side. And then finally, I'm going to swap over my fill color. And I'm going to use the fill color to paint that in. Go over to this part and paint this in as that line. Now, it moves up. It's kind of coming into place. There we go. Let's go to our final frame. And this is where we can select the bar that's already here. And we can actually use that to move it into place. And stretch it out to this side. And if we need to, we could use our paintbrush tool and clean up the edges. I think it actually looks good. So I'm going to back up. In this case, now our patch layer actually has a frame by frame animation. So now he's chomping down. It looks like that. And the final thing we can do is the reverse order for the mouth. So let's go to the mouth layer and turn on visibility for it. And you can see it's going to go from a closed or an open position. We want it to go back to that closed position. Just like we did with the jaw, let's use some of these pre-made, pre-drawn mouth movements and have those match up as well. So go into our timeline. Let's choose this option that's on frame number 14. With that frame selected, control click, and let's copy that frame. We'll move over to this frame, which is frame number 22. Control click, paste and overwrite the frame there. The only thing we need to do is to make sure the top edges of our mouth matches the top edges of the little corners that are up here. So I'm going to move it up. And since I've got my transform tool, I'm going to hold down Option. I'm going to tweak it and stretch it out so that those top corners are now touching. That's why those are there to come in handy. Again, we'll go back up to here. Let's choose the next keyframe, which will be this frame here. We'll copy that frame. Jump to the next frame on this part, Control click, and paste and overwrite those frames. As we did with the other ones, let's move it up into position, and then hold down Option. We're going to drag it over to let it match. If it's off by a little bit, remember that's okay. We're going to try to get it as close as possible. Maybe even need to rotate it just a bit. That looks good for that one. It's starting to get a little bit wonky, but that should be expected for closing the stretching out that we're doing. Finally, let's go get that last frame of it just before it's closing out. So we'll copy this frame, go to the second to last here, and we will paste it and overwrite. In this case, this is the mouth almost closed. It's going to go right behind here. Hold down Option as we stretch it out to match that position. And then finally, the closed out frame. I'm going to make one more copy of the mouth here. So with that one selected, let's insert one more keyframe, F6. I'm just going to flatten this out just a bit more, bring it up, use my arrow keys to nudge it, and then bring it over to this side. That looks really good. And this final frame, it's not going to be open. We're going to select that frame. It's just going to be a line going all the way across in a big smile. So I'm going to delete away my mouth, grab my brush tool. Do make sure your brush has the fill color of black and still has 5 set to the size. And let's draw off the mouth shape. It's just a big old smile going all the way across as you chomp down from one side to the other. With that done, now we can see the mouth is closing and the eyes are closing along with it. Now that everything is done, this is a good time to save up what we have. Let's jump back into scene 1 and test out what this will look like by having all the other tween movements. So if you look at our animation, it's going to move up a little bit. Let's zoom out so I can actually see it. Bring this down. It's going to move up and then chomp down to there. So we need to add the tweening motion for here. So with that selected, we'll control click, create a classic tween to there, and then control click. Let's do a classic tween as it moves down to that position. Finally, I'll turn off visibility for my rough animation. You can see her out, and as he chomps down on the hamburger. So he's sitting, he's opening his mouth, and then big chomp going down. Up, and then chomp down. So this will end the first exercise for this unit. On the next set of exercises, we're going to have the chewing motion where it goes over and over again, looping that up and down motion. And then the final exercise is the swallowing exaggeration. Later on, we'll pull everything together and actually animate the hands as well to pull all the different exaggerated motions together. Now, to show me progress on this exercise, I want you to go up to File and let's go ahead and save the progress that you've made. But let's also go back up to File and do a Save As. With Save As, I want you to add Part 1 to the end of your Flash file, and this is what you're going to upload to Moodle to show me the progress for this first exercise. If there's any problems or issues, we should be able to address them now so that you can add them to your final project later. So I'm going to save this one as well and upload this first Part 1 to the Moodle page.